she's perfect by any means. She's actually incredibly flawed, and she's messy. And, we watch reality TV today, and what's the best thing about reality TV? We like the messy people. They've got stories to tell, they've got background, and Amelia has that background. She is pioneering in so many ways, but she also is quite offensive in many ways as well. And I think it depends who you are and how you see relevance in history as to how you can use these stories, some of which maybe Amelia wouldn't have approved of. But we have to find these narratives, to find that relevance, to find avenues to study ancient Egypt in this case, or any social history for that matter. So yeah, it's her messiness. I think I love a messy character. I mean, she's a real, can I swear?
Yeah, of course.
She's a messy bitch. I love it. I suppose it's right at the very end of what maybe most people consider ancient Egypt, but I would love to have been there on the founding day of Alexandria. Alexander the Great founded Alexandria because of a single quote from the Odyssey by Homer. And I think the audacity of someone founding a capital city on the coast of the Mediterranean simply because of a quote from Homer, I just think is so preposterous, so camp, so ridiculous. I would just love to have been there with Alexander reciting this one paragraph and going, now map out my city using barley. I would just love to have seen that. And apparently the rumour is that infant birds leapt into the air and then ate the town plan, and his seers all said, no, this is great, it means it will be really prosperous. And of course they'd have said anything not to get on his bad books. So I would have loved to have just seen that moment. I think it would have been really entertaining. My favourite place to visit is Esna. I just think as you walk down the steps into what is effectively a huge pit, and suddenly this temple confronts you out of the gloom, it's just miraculous. It's such an extraordinary place. I haven't been since they cleaned the ceilings, and I just can't wait to go back. So Esna, I would love to go back to Esna. Chris Naunton once wrote an article about the potential discovery of the tomb of Nefertiti, and at the end of it he said that something might be lost in the knowing, and I think part of Egypt's mystery is not knowing. And Sarah Parkak has said that maybe we only know about 1% of what's left to be found, and I would agree with that figure. I mean, there's so much left to be found, but there's so much we've already found that is already fascinating, and we can go over and over and over and engage different people and find different narratives. I mean, this is what this book is all about. We already think we know Amelia, but actually if you tug at the frayed edges of things, there's a whole different story there. And I just think there's so much we've yet to discover from what we've already found.
The first time I ever got to Egypt, because I couldn't afford to come, because it was too expensive in the old days, and I was only a poorly paid teacher. So I thought the only thing to do is to take an Egyptian trip with my pupils. We went into Seti I's tomb, of all things, which is the most wonderful tomb paintings. And I went down and they were all going, not actually touching, because they knew not to touch, but they were saying, oh, look, you can see where the man's, he's drawn it out underneath the picture. And I mean, they were just so into it. It was wonderful. If you're talking about the early days of Egyptian history, what about Pepi II? I mean, some of those Old Kingdom things are wonderful, some of the Old Kingdom tombs. Nobody knows anything about them, really. If you go to the Turin Museum, in one of the cases there, they've got a pair of mummified knees, and they think they might be Nefertari's knees. Now, how about that?
That's fantastic. Thank you very much.
It isn't obviously ancient Egyptian, but my background is really looking at the history of Egyptology. So my favourite person has to be, in that, Annie Barlow. She is Bolton through and through. I would absolutely love to have met her. And what's really even sort of more frustrating is that, yes, she died in 1941, but there are so many people that were directly friends with her that only died in the last 15, 20 years, just out of reach of where I started researching. And I could have got so close to to knowing exactly what she was like as a person. She was integral to building Bolton's collection, and she must have been such a character because she seems to have got on their nerves so much, sticking her nose into the museum, which I absolutely love. She was interested in suffrage. She picketed a circus when it came to Bolton because they had animals in it and she didn't want them to be tortured. She campaigned against women's corsets being used. Fantastic character.
There is something about progressives and Egyptology, isn't there?
Absolutely. And that's why I think, her and Amelia must have got on like a house on fire. Right, absolutely. One thing I really want to find out is marrying those two women together, because we know they work together, but I've not got a shred of documentary evidence that puts the two in the same room. Everyone probably says this, but Amana, I just, just because of the change that was happening at that point, I would love to have sort of walked through the city, and just watched it happen. Didn't want to be building those buildings, didn't want to be not that bothered about, being in the palace necessarily, but I would love to have, wandered through the city, seeing what was going on, seeing the difference between what you're supposed to be doing and what maybe you shouldn't be doing. And then see it all come down. I think, see it all change. Because there must have been, it was such a tumultuous time that in one lifetime you'll have seen so much happen that you wouldn't necessarily have seen in many other time periods, I think. I think I'd quite like to be one, not any big event, but at the points, where something goes wrong. You're cutting a tomb, and you know which direction you want to go in, and then suddenly, oh, that's not right. We're going to have to sort of rethink this. But I'd love to be at that point, a fly on the wall, where you've got that conversation between the guys that are in charge and the guys that are doing the work, and they're going, well, now what do we do? Those kind of little things, I think, would be.
When the unfinished obelisk.
When it broke and you went, oh crap. Yeah, I mean, there's this other thing which I don't know if there's any. I've never come across, and there probably is research looking at any that transported stuff has been lost. Because there must have been occurrences where you're transporting such a large piece, whatever it is, and the boat sank or whatever. It's gone into the Nile, and you're not going to be able to get that out. I would love to be there and watch that happen.
We look on them all as individuals, the ones we've worked with over the years. And Asriel was one of my favourite always. She's a mummy in the Manchester Museum collection, the first mummy that they acquired. She lived to an advanced age for ancient Egypt. She had a whole range of diseases, but we did analysis of her hair many years ago, and her hair was dyed with henna, and this was done not too long before she died. So she went into the hereafter with all her beauty products intact. I always think she had a lot of character. My favourite place is the Temple of Seti I at Abydos. I did my PhD thesis many years ago, which was translating the inscriptions in the whole temple. I think one of my favourite parts is the Osiris complex at the rear of the temple, because that's still quite mysterious in terms of its use. There are many fewer inscriptions on the walls. They're more difficult to identify or explain, and so it still holds out quite a lot of interesting mysteries, I think. One of the most memorable moments was some years ago in the laboratory in Manchester, and we'd been working on a project on bilharzia in ancient and modern Egypt. And my colleague, Dr. Patricia Rutherford, identified with a new technique that she was using the remains of a causative parasite in the body of one of the mummies. And this was the first time that the parasite had been identified in this way, and we went on to do DNA sampling on that, and it was shown to be a parasite that was 2,000 years old. So this was incredible, the fact that you're looking at something that hasn't been seen wherever, but certainly not from antiquity. I carried out a study on cancer in ancient Egypt some years ago with a colleague, Professor Zimmerman, in America. And there's very little evidence of cancer disease in ancient Egypt. People say that this is because they died of something else, but there's very little evidence of childhood cancer. There should be evidence, if it's there, of the disease in the bodies, and there isn't. So the conclusion that you can draw is that it was very much less prevalent then than in modern industrialised society.
So not that it didn't exist, but just that it was very much rarer.
Much rarer, yes.
I worked in the cellars of the old Cairo Museum on an artefact which was brought to me out of storage and put on a little stool. The piece I'm talking about is a prosthetic articulated big toe. I'm known as the toe lady. That was the best visit that I'd ever had into Egypt, because I actually got and saw all these fantastic boxes and things on shelves. I'd love to see it in its new context in the new museum. It made me very proud.
Privileged enough to work in two tombs in the Valley of the Kings. KV39, which is believed to be the first tomb to be built in the Valley of the Kings. KV35 in 2003 with the three individuals in the side chamber. The elder woman, the young woman and the boy. Queen Ty, Prince Thutmose, and if we believe the bust is Neft, then Nefertiti. It's a special place, it's got a special atmosphere, and also, knowing people on the West Bank as friends and family, really. The whole of Luxor has its own atmosphere, so that includes Luxor Temple, Karnak Temple, the whole place. Luxor is special, certainly. I think it's probably the individuals, the ancient Egyptian individuals that we know, whether it's the pharaohs, whether it's the people that worked for the pharaohs like Ka and Merit, who we studied, the architect Ka, who worked for three pharaohs on their tombs, but also the pharaohs themselves and their journey, if you like, negotiating the priesthood often, how they interacted with the people, but also the outside world as well. I come in from a scientific perspective. Chemistry is my the way I came in. My PhD on Egyptian mummification through that. I don't have mentors in Egyptology, if you like. Where I look to is, are the ancient Egyptians themselves, which I don't think is a bad place to end up. Start and finish, actually. The moment when it was decided that the place to build the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, this is where it was. So Akmosi Nefertari, being realistic as regent rather than Amenhotep I, who was a boy at the time. So I think that moment is something that I think of as a concept, if you like, that this is the place to be, where X does literally mark the spot. The most famous cemetery in the world still has secrets to be revealed. Even Tutankhamun's tomb wasn't the last moment. There's more to come. There's no question about it.
It is perpetually exciting, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
I was a dentist in a previous life, so when I got into Egyptology, I was brought in by Rosalie to look at the teeth, ancient Egyptian teeth, which I had some knowledge of, obviously. It's amazing what you can find from teeth. The diet they ate, age sometimes you can get, and sometimes even where they came from. So that's sort of been my interest over the last 10, 15 years.
I
always liked the idea of Sennacherib, really, who was the possibly lover of Hatshepsut, or certainly chief courtier, and he always appealed to me, and what exactly he got up to and what he did. So, interesting character. I've specialised a little bit. I've written a book on the Saite period, and the Saite period is around about 600 BC, so it's a lot later than the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, where most people talk about. But the late period is something that I'm interested in, yeah. So if I could go back, I would sort of, if I could invite anybody to dinner, I would invite the people from the late period.
I used to work for a few seasons in the Assasif district of the cemeteries on the other side of the river from Luxor. I would be on site at about 7 o'clock in the morning every day. What I remember most about being in that area is that we would take our breakfast at 10 o'clock in the morning. We were working down in a tomb. We'd come out to the surface, as it were, for breakfast, and I would sit having my boiled eggs looking at the Temple of Hatshepsut every day. All around that area, sadly you can't do it now, but it used to be possible to walk from there back to where I was staying, which was down towards the Colossi Memnon. You could walk through the villages. So, and if you knew where to go, you could go off the beaten track, and it was just lovely and quiet, and through all the houses that don't exist anymore. So that feels a bit like a second home. It's a cemetery, and yet there would always have been people living there. And actually, so much of funerary culture of the ancient Egyptians is really about life. It's not about sort of the moment of dropping dead and the lights going out, and it's actually about life going on, and it's much more to do with remembering people, as all funerary culture is really. It's for I've come to think it's for the people who are left behind. And in that sense, the cemeteries are just it's so rich. There can't be anywhere more rich archaeologically in the world. I was staying in a place that's better known now as the Hotel Marsam. In those days, it was known as Sheikh Ali's. Sheikh Ali being Sheikh Ali Abd Rasul, whose ancestors had discovered the royal cache in the late 19th century. That place, now, as I say, now a hotel, was occupied almost exclusively by archaeological teams then. So, like I say, talking about layers of history, we're there in a place which is so rich as a place that gives us so much information about the ancient past, but it's also it's very rich historically in modern times. And again, as an aspiring archaeologist, to be there among all these teams and to be a part of that was just great. I'm going to tell you the third person that came to mind because I think it's a better story. There's a guy called Montrem Hart who was the leading dignitary in Thebes during the 25th dynasty and across the transition to the 26th. He has an enormous tomb that's not the one I worked in. It was next door. The one I worked in was really splendid, but this one is, if anything, even more splendid. And Montrem Hart's one of the best known historic figures from the period of history that I studied for my PhD. And he's the great political survivor. His family rose to prominence under a group of Kushite kings from Sudan. He was married to a Kushite member of the royal family. The Kushites were kicked out by the Assyrians, and Montrem Hart became the Assyrians' favoured governor. And at the point power handed over to the 26th dynasty, it was Montrem Hart who was there welcoming them. I suspect he probably wasn't a very nice guy, but he was a great survivor, and he left us these fantastic monuments. And like I say, we know him better than we know most people. And in that sense, I've spent a lot of time thinking about him and a lot of time right by his tomb and in and around these places that he lived in and worked in and helped build in some cases. So, yeah, he's somebody I thought about a lot. I'll give you a two-step answer to this. The first one is to go to the Luxor Temple. It's very beautiful. Try and go in the magic hour. It's open in the afternoon, early evening, so try and go as the sun is raking across the Theban hills, across the river into the temple. It's stunningly beautiful. You can't go to many sites in Egypt at that magic hour. You're usually getting chucked out. And it's one of these monuments that was built over successive generations, centuries. So most of what you see, particularly in the back half of the temple, was built by Amenhotep III, also little bits sort of finished off or completed by the Tutankhamun and Horemheb. It's a period that's very interesting to me. Right in the middle of all of that, Alexander the Great built a shrine, or somebody did in his name. It gives you a really lovely sense of the development of the monument. And actually, in fact, just also around that area, in Roman times, the Romans plastered over some of Amenhotep's reliefs and painted their own figures on top of that plaster. And where that plaster's come away, you can see both layers. My silly answer is that you should go to McDonald's. It's got great air conditioning. Yeah, the food might not be the healthiest or even the tastiest, but at least it's quick and it's reliable, and you get a fantastic view of the temple from the second floor. Archaeology is not all about finding everything and then sort of completing it, completing the set and getting everything. It's an ongoing process. I think you can construct a good argument to suggest that a tomb of Nefertiti might still be out there. I'm not saying that it is out there waiting to be discovered, but you can construct an argument to sort of say that it is. And if it's out there and it hasn't yet been discovered, and if it were to be intact, it would be quite something, and it would, we might hope, answer quite a lot of questions about that very short period but very highly scrutinised period that everybody's desperate to know about. So that would be exciting, and that tomb, part of that argument would be that it's in that area that we've been talking about, in the Valley of the Kings somewhere. About 10 years ago, Nicholas Reeves came up with an argument, I thought very well argued and very well constructed, that there are more chambers behind the walls in King Tut's tomb. 3 sets of radar scans were done to investigate that, and the conclusion seems to be that there isn't anything there. There is something underneath the valley floor a little way from King Tut's tomb, but it seems more likely that is part of KV5, the end of which has never been found. KV5, the entrance to KV5 is across the valley floor on the other side, but it extends underneath the where everybody walks, basically. So if there's anything there, it's probably a bit more of KV5.
It's relentlessly exciting, isn't it?
Thank
you ever so much.
That's right.
I love Philae. I love Philae. I actually like looking at the Nile. I like seeing the Nile, and I like seeing the backdrop to the Nile and the places, and in my mind the ancient world comes alive again. In my mind I see ancient life reenacted. My favourite places are shaped by ancient texts and ancient documentary evidence, because that's where people come to life. I feel I know them, I look at the texts, I look at what they wrote. There's a small town that very few people know about from the Ptolemaic period called Patharis, and I've looked at a lot of the documents there, so I feel I know the population of Patharis. I even know who lives next door to people, what legal documents they exchanged, who they married. The children of one set of brothers married the children of the other set of brothers. So even to that detail.
Probably one of the 3 jubilees of Amenhotep III, when he became the living Arton, and he said, "I am the living sun disk." The amount of splendour, of spectacle, copious amounts of wine, just the sheer spectacle and the beauty. I would love to have been there, and almost neck and neck, the donations of Alexandria, when Cleopatra and her 4 children received so much of the ancient world at the gift of Mark Antony, and they were well on their way to reconstructing that whole empire of Alexander the Great, and indeed Cleopatra's pharaonic predecessors. That must have been an amazing spectacle too, just to see how these people put into physical form their ambitions on the world stage. Absolutely magical. Well, Amenhotep III because I've always absolutely adored him, the art, the culture, his achievements, his monumental structures. Cleopatra VII, obviously, she's a great hero for many reasons. I have a soft spot for Amenhotep II. There are so many, and Cara Merritt, we did the BBC series a few years ago on this working couple who were fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So it's quite impossible, really. I mean, even just in ancient Egypt, there are lots of favourites. And of course, there's the mighty Amelia Edwards, who's always been a real icon and a real inspiration as a woman who achieved so much, and she achieved it herself. She wasn't particularly born with a silver spoon in her mouth. She worked very hard, and she created these two amazing Egyptological institutions, the Egypt Exploration Society and the first chair of Egyptology in Britain at University College. There are so many people that I'm drawn to, and because I spend most of my life in ancient Egypt and in Egyptology rather than the real world, the list just gets longer and longer, so I can't just name one person. The site behind the Colosseum Memnon. Again, my boy Amenhotep III, which for the last 25 years plus has been the subject of ongoing excavations by our colleague Dr. Ulrich Sarosian, and it's been a privilege and an honour to, in a very small part, help fund these excavations, which are revealing so much of Egypt's, in my opinion, greatest pharaoh and his vast funerary temple.
We had a meal in a restaurant opposite the Colosseum.
Yes, I know exactly where you had your meal. You can be there in amongst it. It's not gone away. It'll never go away. It's there. People with the eyes to see can see it all.
I really feel like I've made friends there.
Yeah, they are the most wonderful people. I mean, I was adopted by an Egyptian family many years ago, and it's an overused phrase, the salt of the earth, but you know, I'm passionate about Yorkshire and I'm passionate about Egypt, and I get the same kind of feelings when I'm in Egypt with my Egyptian friends and my Egyptian family as I do when I'm home in Yorkshire. So they're both such special, special places.